The general election did raise questions about the future of the Union. We see a very different result in Scotland than the rest of the UK, with the SNP winning a vast majority of seats here in Scotland, reigniting or perhaps accelerating the demands for independence in Scotland. We also see Conservative government under Boris Johnson being quite resistant to these demands, emphasising the future of the Union and the unity of the Union. In Wales, you see Conservatives winning seats that they hadn't yet won before, but also a growing sense, particularly amongst Welsh Labour, of a demand for further devolution and even some referencing indie curiosity, being curious about the prospect of independence. And in Northern Ireland, you had a majority of seats for the first time going to nationalist political parties, reigniting debates over a border poll and the future of Northern Ireland. Boris Johnson has really put the Union at the heart of his campaign, and his Scottish Conservative colleagues have campaigned on their resistance to another referendum. I think we can expect the Johnson Conservative government to be quite resistant to calls for another referendum. They're likely to say that there's no mandate for such a referendum and argue that this is against the will of the Scottish people. So I think we can expect them to be quite resistant. They've focused on a discourse around unionism and perhaps a hyper-unionism, a more muscular, more assertive unionism than we've heard from Conservatives in years past. However, I think particularly if the SNP wins in 2021, this might be a difficult position to sustain. It was under a Conservative government in 2014 that a referendum was negotiated and held. So there's a precedent there that if the SNP wins the majority, they should be able to hold a referendum. But it remains to be seen how Boris Johnson will approach this. So if a referendum isn't held in 2020, the 2021 elections are likely to be heavily focused on independence. The SNP will use these elections, or will campaign in these elections, to reinforce its mandate to hold a referendum on independence. The party will likely suggest that a vote for the SNP in this election is a vote for another independence referendum. They're being quite careful. They're framing it as a right to hold a referendum or a right to decide Scotland's future rather than a vote for independence. But we should expect to see this narrative really come to the fore in this campaign. I think we should be cautious about these results, or predicting these results more than a year and a half ahead of that poll. The SNP has been in government for quite some time. We're starting to see some cracks and some criticisms of their handling of certain domestic policy issues. So they may need to refocus their effort and articulate two main messages. One, the right for Scotland to have a referendum, and two, the policy and the performance of the Scottish government.